Pike Miller and the Buckskin Kid spent a week in Helena putting together a wagon and provisions, then for 3 weeks traveled 200 miles with the wind east through the Crazy Mountains and the Belts to the Judith Basin. The region had been a prehistoric inland sea, but in 1880 it was a sea of grass surrounded by a coastline of snow-capped mountains. In many ways, it was this view and time that would always stay with Charles Marion Russell.
When I came west, I got the cream. Let the come-latelys have the skim milk.
Pike and Charlie were headed to tend sheep, but central Montana then was predominantly cattle country with an estimated 500,000 head in the territory. The two arrived in a snowstorm and stayed for a night at Bill Correll's home. Pike told the Corrells that he had just returned from the States and introduced his young companion as Kid Russell. Charlie had a paint box with brushes, watercolors, black crayon, and a ball of beeswax wrapped in a flannel cloth. Pike said, "Show him what you can do."
He painted a few horses on the backs of some old envelopes. They amused us very much, but we placed very little value on them, and they were eventually burned in my heating stove.
In the early Russell years, before the Buckskin Kid became the legend, delighting in and then tossing a piece of Russell's art would be a familiar story. It probably didn't take too much thinking for the Buckskin Kid to quickly realize that tending sheep didn't suit him. Neither did Pike Miller.
Miller did not understand the boy's nature and was not backward about telling me that I was no good. So we split up, and I didn't think Pike missed me much, as I was considered pretty ornery.
Ornery and unhappy. Charlie spent more time sculpting than herding. From working at his father's brick and tile works in St. Louis, he had learned something about clay and how to fire it, and while working for Pike Miller, he built a crude kiln.
He was supposed to be herding sheep, but was modeling. Deer, horses, cattle, bears, and other creatures and characters. These he gave to every Tom, Dick, and Harry. Had I at the time the slightest knowledge of the fabulous value that would later attach to the artist's model,
Soon Charlie geared himself up for a different role. He donned his beaded buckskin shirt and he paid a Piegan Indian named War Wound $45 for a mare and a pinto pony he would call Monty. Over the decades, it was often said that Monty became one of Charlie Russell's most cherished friends and would stay with him over thousands of miles, crisscrossing central Montana.
We were kids together. We have always been together. We don't exactly talk to each other, but we sure savvy one another.
But these were their first miles together, and that first evening, adrift and homeless together, it wouldn't be difficult to imagine the kid mumbling self-doubting questions to his new pony. As the sun faded and slowly climbed up the Crazy Mountains, Charlie and Monty camped along the Judith River.
With no money or grub, life did not seem joyful, and I felt mighty blue. While I was wondering where my next meal was coming from, a rider with several pack horses appeared and made his camp on the river near me.
He was Jake Hoover, a trapper Charlie had seen in the mountains before. Jake asked the 16-year-old where he kept his grub.
"I ain't got none," I answered, and then I told him my troubles. He listened until I was through, and while I was talking, I couldn't help feeling that he would be my friend. "Well," he said, "if you want to, you can come with me. You can stay till you get something better to do."
Stay he did. For almost 2 years, he joined forces with this bearded, long-haired mountain man who never traveled without a .44 Winchester across his saddle. Years later, Charlie said Jake shot a rifle faster than any man he had ever known. Hoover had just sold elk and deer that he had killed to local ranchers along the Judith River, and he was on his way home to his cabin on the South Fork of the Judith in Pig Eye Basin. Finally, Charlie was about to shed his 16-year-old St. Louis skin and become the mountain man's apprentice.
Early next morning, we broke camp and started for the mountains. Shut off from the outside world, it was a hunter's paradise, bounded by walls of mountains and containing miles of grassy open spaces, more green and beautiful than any man-made parks. Nature had surely done her best, and no king of the old times could have claimed a more beautiful, more bountiful domain. This life suited me.
He had so many memories. He had to have so many memories here, and I'll guarantee every one of them was heart-filled. The scenery, the times he had with Jake Hoover, the experiences with the animals. I'm sure he felt lucky, and it was just a part of not being hooked up and connected with the real world, because this was Charlie's world.
This concept of Russell and his early work being disposable, being tossed into the fire or burned in the furnace, is that how a lot of artists start? That there's people regret not keeping those sketches that their dinner guest made on the cloth tablecloth?
Only if the artist becomes incredibly famous. And no question about the fact these were toss-offs. You had Joe DeYoung, who apprenticed with Russell really beginning in 1916. So he's a fully established celebrity, a national figure, and an artist. And Joe DeYoung picked up every day out of the studio from the garbage pail, little drawings that were tossed. So yes, I would say it's totally true. He didn't keep many of those, and really early Russell art is uncommon. The really early stuff from Montana in the 1882, 83, 84, 85 period, you can look at the catalog raisonné under those years and you'll see how few works survive. But he was learning, he was sketching. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, William mentioned the expense of the documentary, and that was part of it right there, is we had to acquire one of those early works and then actually throw it in a campfire, so. That blew about half the budget right there.
But Gus, you just saved the money on the Jake Hoover photo, because that's actually you.
You know, it's funny you said that, because when I was a younger man, I looked like that.
That's what I'm saying.
I hope I have better luck than Jake Hoover.
So that is the first time we hear, in this room anyway, the voice of Charlie Russell. And talking to these three men who've had Charlie Russell in their head for a long time, I want their reaction to, that's Bill Pullman, the movie star, who's also a Montana resident. And I'd like Gus and Paul to talk about working with him to realize this voice. But so is that a Charlie you know, that voice?
Oh, Jim, what do you think?
I couldn't hear the question. I'm sorry.
Okay.
What did you think of Bill Pullman's, of the Charlie voice that you heard?
Oh, I like it. I'm half deaf. And,
that helps.
I can hear. I can hear it. You know, I like it. I think it's great.
Well, I think it's a great thing about a documentary, and I think artistic license is too strong a word, but we'll never know what he sounds like. So that voice fits in to the rest of the story so well that it is very persuasively Charlie, and it rings true. I think it's excellent. He's great. And the other thing is, I know a little bit about the process of selecting this voice. Is Bill Pullman is somebody we may recognize, and we've seen him in movies, but he's not one of a voice where you say, oh, that's, Meryl Streep doing her Polish accent. It's still Meryl Streep. It's this gets to be Charlie's voice now, and that's the clever thing about this.
Yeah, I like it, and I like the fact that it's very soft. You have to listen to hear him. And that was apparently how Charlie worked as a storyteller. He didn't speak out. He sort of let the words seep out. And you lean forward, and others lean forward to hear the story. And I think that voice does a nice job of drawing you into the way. The cadence is neat. I like it. I'm amazed we don't have a wax cylinder recording or something of Russell's voice. We have a little bit of sound film footage of him later in life, but we don't have his voice, apparently.
One of the
Being the patron saint of Montana, you want your patron saints to sound like Moses, you know, and have Charlie say things like, "Behold his mighty hand." But it's like Brian said, he, you know, from all accounts, he spoke low because he liked for people to kind of, you know, be quiet and grow closer to him and strain to hear everything he was going to say. So we tried that approach. And Paul was in the studio in Bozeman with Bill Pullman. And why don't you talk about that, Paul?
And then I'm going to lead back to you. Before we even got Bill Pullman in the studio, I contacted Brian and Rick Stewart and John to give me any kind of a sense about how we could coach Bill Pullman for Charlie, Kathy Baker for Nancy, and what we needed to do. And they were excellent. And Bill, these guys and Kathy being professionals, they are so good about coaching. And it was fun to work with them. In the studio, in Bozeman on a snowy December day when we recorded Bill, and I'm getting little goosebumps again remembering that. He just, like, we got him in a little booth, and his face changed. He kind of looks like Charlie in the first place. His face changed, and he was in his little room looking at the microphone, and he became Charlie. And I want to lead that back to Gus. Gus has heard that voice more than anybody at this point, hours and hours and hours. And Gus, what do you?
Well, yeah, you can't fool me because I'm the guy behind the curtain. I know where all the warts are, and you know, especially this first hour, there must be 23 voices in it. And of course, we can't get professional actors to be, you know, 23 professional actors because we blew our budget burning that Russell. So I just grab people that come down the hall, you know, hey, you want to be a cowboy? And, you know, that kind of thing. And when I'm editing that, I can always tell, oh yeah, that's so-and-so. And I'll throw some sound effects behind it to kind of soften it a little bit. But when I'm editing Bill Pullman, I don't think Bill Pullman, I really was immediately swept away thinking, this is Charlie. So, I mean, if you can fool me.
And I want Tom Petrie and the Greater Montana Foundation to know that we didn't use your money for that art that we had.
There's a